Listen, whether you're aware of it or not, there are not just two people in your marriage, there are four people in your marriage. And the two that you're likely not paying attention to are probably the two that are showing up and keeping you in conflict and keeping you stuck in your relationship. So in today's video, I want to talk about how your childhood you and your spouse's childhood them may be showing up and negatively impacting your relationship. I'm going to give you 5 areas to consider evaluating and looking at that may be an indicator that your childhood is now impacting your adult marriage. That's today on RelationShots. Hey, welcome to RelationShots. If this is your first time hanging out with us, don't forget to download your free guide to intimacy. You'll see a link in the description area below, as well as a bunch of other resources down there that may help you depending on what your relational needs are right now. So, whether you're aware of it or not, your childhood is showing up loud and proud in your marriage as an adult. Now, some of us are completely unaware of how our childhood shows up, and others of us may think we've dealt with it, but still don't recognize some of the ways it shows up. So in this video, I want to talk about 5 areas that you can evaluate to know if your childhood experiences are showing up. Because here's our reality. All of us, our childhood experiences, both positive and negative, will significantly shape how we approach our marriages, right? It'll influence our communication, our expectations, our emotional regulation. So we tend to have this composite picture of the people who influenced us in the past, right? Their looks, their personality, their tone of voice, their behavior, and a bunch of other traits. And so what happens then is people tend to gravitate towards relationships that resemble their parents or the way their parents treated them, good or bad. Now, some people, if they've done some work and have healed, can recognize that tendency and fight against it and pick somebody who is not like your parents because your parents were not healthy. But our general tendency is we when left to ourselves, we will be drawn into that, right? So for instance, someone who's emotionally detached because one of your parents was that way, what will happen is psychoanalysis called this repetition compulsion, but it's this unconscious tendency to want to fix the past or recreate it in order to make it better, right? The person who's like, oh, I'm always attracted to bad boys or whatever it is. Usually what's happening is you got hurt by one or in your past, and your hope is if you can go find somebody similar and recreate the relationship, but have a different, better outcome now, it somehow fixes the past or heals the past, right? So that's just an example. But I want to give you 5 areas that may be worth looking at and evaluating to see if your childhood is manifesting in your marriage in a way that's not helping you. The first area is just unrealistic expectations, right? We all have relationship models. We had what we saw in our childhood, and your childhood experiences with your parents, your caregivers, is going to create expectations about how the marriage should function. And what that will do is oftentimes lead to potential disappointment or misunderstandings when those expectations aren't met in your marriage. Now, sometimes your past, the model that you had, created an unhealthy expectation. Other times, an unrealistic expectation. But if you're not aware of it, it can create that. Another area under expectations may be our communication styles, right? If you witness unhealthy communication patterns like criticism, defensiveness, silent treatment in your family, you might unconsciously adopt similar behavior in your marriage, which is going to hinder open and honest communication. Also in the area of emotional regulation, if you weren't taught healthy ways to express your emotions, to manage stress, you're probably going to struggle to do that in your marriage, which is going to lead to conflict or emotional distance, right? So if you don't know how to regulate yourself because it was never shown to you, you're going to struggle in your relationship as well. Or if maybe your parents, whenever you did express emotions, they squashed it, you are going to believe that you can't show up in your relationship and share those emotions as well. So unrealistic expectations is one area. A second area is what I mentioned in the intro, which is repetition compulsion. So here's what this does. You will seek familiarity unconsciously. You're going to gravitate towards partners in a relationship that has dynamics that mirror your childhood experiences. So that might be positive in a good way or negative. And what you're trying to do is just recognize you're trying to fix or recreate them, right? So if you're seeing the same pattern in your marriage that you saw in your childhood, you need to realize that you may be with this person. Now, I'm not telling you get divorced, but the tendencies of this person may be something that you are trying to fix in order to fix your childhood, which is going to make you even more hyper vigilant to fix this thing than you would be if you didn't have that stuff pulling you in the past, right? You're also going to repeat patterns. You're going to repeat unhealthy patterns of conflict. You may be codependency, maybe emotional unavailability, even if you're aware of those issues. So you need to be aware of, am I repeating stuff unconsciously in an attempt to go back and fix what was never fixed in childhood? You can't put that on your marriage or your spouse. You need to recognize that and deal with it. A third area that you need to evaluate when it comes to is your childhood showing up are your own emotional wounds and trauma, right? You might have trust issues. If you experience neglect, abuse, betrayal, whatever else in your childhood, you might struggle with trust and intimacy in your marriage. You might be walking around with a fear of abandonment or rejection. Guess what that's going to do to you? It's going to make you hypersensitive to any type of criticism. That's going to make you hypersensitive to any kind of withdrawal or silence from your spouse. And so you've got to recognize that. You also may have a fear of intimacy, right? Trauma often can lead to a fear of vulnerability and closeness, which is going to make it hard for you to form deep emotional connections in your marriage. You might also be emotionally reactive, right? If you have unresolved childhood trauma, it can trigger intense emotional responses to even minor disagreements or perceived slights in your marriage, right? You're probably familiar with the saying that lots of people say, if it's hysterical, it's historical. If you are overreacting to slights, to things that are happening in the marriage that somebody who does not have some of your childhood trauma would not react the same way, that's a pretty good indicator that you have some unresolved stuff that you need healed before you can show up in this marriage in the right way. So overreactions are a good indicator that we got some childhood trauma. A fourth area to evaluate is just around your values and beliefs. Now, in a good way, core values can come from your childhood experiences. Those can shape your core values, which in turn are going to impact your decisions and actions in your marriage. So that may be views on money, work ethic, family roles. Now, hopefully, if you did any premarital, you talked about core values, because core values are a key part of determining, should I be in a marriage relationship with this person? If we are not lined up on some of our top core values, we will be competing. Values will compete for the resources you have, time, money, energy. So you've got to be aware that that dynamic may happen, right? Your family dynamics also show up. So whatever was going on in your family of origin around expectations around family life, what gender roles are, the division of labor in your marriage, all of those things around core values and behaviors will be tied to your childhood and maybe showing up in your marriage. Hopefully you talked about those before you got married. And a fifth area where your childhood issues might be showing up in your marriage presently is just around seeking validation and reassurance. So if you have a need for approval because you received very little positive reinforcement or validation in your childhood, you might constantly seek approval and reassurance from your spouse, which potentially will lead to codependency and insecurity, which is not going to be helpful. You might also have difficulty saying no. If you were raised in a household where your needs were often ignored or dismissed, you might struggle to assert yourself or boundaries in your marriage, which is going to make it difficult to maintain a healthy marriage. So listen, if you have a insatiable need for validation and reassurance, that's probably tied to your childhood, unless you just happen to be in a relationship with somebody who's unfaithful all the time, who's shady, who doesn't communicate. Then you could probably have a healthy childhood and still be in that position. But if that's not the state of your marriage, but there is a insistent need for extra validation, that's probably tied to what you did not get in childhood. So those are 5 areas that may be tied to your childhood, that may be showing up in your marriage and impacting it in a negative way. So if you have felt like, yeah, man, it don't feel like it's me and my spouse, it feels like I'm fighting more people. You're fighting childhood them, and you're fighting childhood you. showing up in your adult relationship. So hopefully that's helpful. Obviously, if you are struggling in these areas, probably some counseling, some marriage coaching, something to help you kind of work through how do I heal from the past so this stuff doesn't continue showing up. But I think a lot of the times our problem is we can't resolve stuff because we're fighting the wrong thing. And so if you're fighting your spouse, if you're fighting some other issue and not addressing the childhood you or childhood them, maybe showing up in a negative way because you haven't dealt with those past hurts, you may be not making any progress in the relationship. So drop a comment. Let me know which of those 5 areas maybe you recognize showing up in your relationship. Again, some of this is attached to, if you're familiar with attachment styles and attachment theory, I've done videos on those. I'll put those at the end of this if you want to go back and look at what attachment styles are all about. And until next time, I'll see you right back here on RelationShots.